Hi and welcome to another video. This is Jennifer McGuire. So today, instead of covering a particular technique like I usually do in my videos, I wanted to share with you a bunch of hacks that I do, usually off screen, to save time, to save energy, and to save money. So these are just little tricks and tips that help me to stretch my supplies, save a little time, make more cards faster, things like that. So I'm going to throw a bunch of these ideas at you. You may have seen me do a couple in the past, but I bet there's something you haven't seen yet. I will be making a bunch of cards at the same time, but really focusing on the tips that I have to share. Okay, let's start out by making a bunch of images using this flower stamp from the new Pinkfresh Studio Modern Layered Florals. This is a super easy layering set, and you can quickly create a large image with just 4 inks. In fact, you could probably get away with using first and second generation stamping if you wanted to. I really like the sentiments also in here. I'll be using a few of those later. While I'm creating those images, I'll also be creating these layered script words, also from Pinkfresh Studio. This is a big stamp set, and there's the coordinating die set. Look at all the different words that you can get, and they have a 3-dimensional look to them. Even better, the die cuts out the word, but there's also a shadow die too, to help make it stand out on your card. So I will be stamping a bunch of these, and then saving some of them for later, and using a couple today. Whenever I do a lot of stamping, I like to do the die cutting first. I have white cardstock pre-cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I find that's really helpful to just grab and start stamping or die cutting. What I'm doing here is taking as many of my dies from the 2 sets that I showed you and squeezing them all onto one of those cardstock pieces. I'm using some purple temporary tape to hold them together. Now I'm going to run this through my die cut machine. I use the Gemini Junior and also the Spellbinders Platinum. Okay, so I cut out a bunch of images there at once. Now watch this. I pulled the dies away, leaving them connected by the tape, and I'm moving on to another piece of cardstock. I don't have to reposition them to fit anymore because they're taped together. So I can lift it off, move to a new piece of cardstock, and do that over and over until I have a lot of dies cut. Notice that I'm only going to start by stamping the flowers, but since I was die cutting all those flowers, I might as well die cut the words also, and I've set those aside and we'll come back to them. So this is one of my first time saving hacks. If you're going to be die cutting, die cut more at the same time. You can save the pieces for later. Sometimes I even do this with generic word dies such as hello, and I keep them in a drawer so I can grab those when I'm ready to create a card in the future. Now it's time to do the stamping. It's always helpful to use a stamping tool if you have one, but if you have an acrylic block, you can definitely translate some of these tips into that also. Now I have the negative space of all that die cutting. Instead of throwing it away, I kept it, and I'm taping it into my MISTI stamping tool. And behind the flower die cut opening, I have tape facing up. I used a little anti-static powder tool on it so it's not too sticky, and I'm going to pop one of my die cuts into the opening. And I'm starting with my first layer of that floral image. Here's a look at the inks that I use throughout this video. These are all Pinkfresh Studio dye inks, but you could definitely use whatever type of inks you want. So I'm starting with my lightest colors for the flowers, and I'm stamping that. Then I can take out the die cut, put in the next, and stamp again. By taping it into my MISTI stamping tool, it stays put. I don't have to mess with the magnet, and I can just continue to stamp over and over again in the same place. And I can easily switch between colors. After I did a bunch of die cuts with the first layer of flowers, it's time to come in with the first layer of leaves. Now, I often reach for lighter ink than I intended to, so that's why you often see me double stamp. It's kind of become a habit. It helps to make the ink darker than what you kind of fit what you want better. Now I'm in with the second layer of the flower, and then I'll come in with the second layer of the leaves. I like to skip around to different layerings so that the ink has some time to absorb and it leaves my stamping nice and crisp. Okay, so after this, I end up with a bunch of flower bouquets, all done very quickly, thanks to doing all my die cutting first, and this trick with using the negative space to hold my die cuts as I stamp. Now again, I recommend mise en place, where you get everything prepared and ready to go before you dive into card making. I did all my flowers. Let's do some sentiments with that script layering die set. Now, I'm not going to show the steps of this. It's very easy to follow from the packaging and from the markings on the stamp set. It tells you which images go together and in what order. And I was able to create thank you and hello in all the different colors to match the flowers that I created earlier. I'm only going to use the thank you today in this video, but I'm saving the others for later. And remember, there is a shadow die to create a shadow die cut for those words too. And I love the look of these. And I also like that they're a bit smaller so you can fit them on a card easily. So here's my first card using my purple images. I have the large flower image here, and I'm adding a little white gel pen to the center of the flowers, which is just a quick and easy detail. Then I have the script thank you on the bottom on a white cardstock strip. And then I used a scrap piece of purple glitter cardstock just to add a little interest along the card. This is a great way to use up scraps by creating a border like that. Also notice the envelope. It says sending you a big hug with a fold in the middle. I used that sentiment on all of my envelopes for today's video. And I wanted to show you that's from the Pinkfresh Studio Hugs and Good Vibes stamp set. This is a great stamp set that has a large image that fills a card nicely, so it's good for a quick one-layer card. But I like also the small sentiments that mention hugs. I'm a big fan of stamp sets that have greetings that can be used on cards and envelopes. Okay, let's go use a few more of those floral images that I created earlier. Now, this isn't a time-saving tip. I just wanted to show you how cool these background stamps are from Pinkfresh Studio. So we have the chevron background on the left and the nested diamond on the right. These are background stamps that have the pieces cut apart, but they fit together. So you can stamp each piece a different color. So you could even have a rainbow background of diamonds, or as you see, I'm just going to do two colors alternating with this chevron background. So I have mounted the background in my Misty stamping tool, and then I'm removing every other V shape. That way I can ink up just these using a peach ink onto a light peach cardstock. And then once I've stamped those, I can pop the other ones back in place and then remove the first ones that I've already stamped and stamp again in a different color. You could do each of these in a different color for a rainbow. You could do whatever you want, but I wanted to do the two-tone. That's something that's really hard to achieve with regular background stamps, and these background stamps that come apart make it super easy. I really like when companies do creative products like this that allow us to stretch the products and get new looks. So here I did two tones of peach ink, and then on my blue one I did a blue ink and white pigment ink. And you can see I did it on the other red card here that says lovely also. White pigment ink on colored cardstock is always fun. Okay, so let's go ahead and start pulling these together. I'm going to show you the sentiments that I used. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Phrase Builder Hello Dies. So it has the word hello, bestie, beautiful, gorgeous, handsome, lovely, and friend. So you can do hello bestie, hello handsome, whatever you want, or use them separately. I like that these have the word itself and the shadow die included. Here's another hack for you. I know white cardstock is much less expensive than colored cardstock, so I usually use white for my die cutting. I have already die cut hello 3 times and glued it together for a stacked dimension, and that's what you see with the hello here. I'm putting it onto a piece of purple tape so it stays still as I press my ink pad right across the top. This colors just the top of the die cut, and the stacked die cuts under it stay white, which will help it stand out on our card nicely. I didn't have a piece of red cardstock scrap that matched nicely with this, so I just created my own color. Off screen, I've arranged some of these pieces onto 3 cards. To help the sentiment stand out even more, I use my Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen. Instead of using specialty cardstock, this is a great way to make it stand out and have some shine. Now notice that lovely up there on the card on the top. I thought it looked a little too light, the sentiment lovely. So I decided to go over it with a Copic marker, a red marker that matched. This is another thing I do often. If I can't find a cardstock that matches well, I just get a color that's similar or very close, and then I change it with a marker or ink and just kind of help it get to the color I want. If I want it to be darker, sometimes I just color a gray marker over it and it just gives it a little bit of a darker color. So that's another trick for getting your sentiments to be the color you want without having to cut up a new piece of cardstock. Okay, so let's look at the completed cards that I have so far. I did trim down that blue background and add it to a white 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding note card. And here is the You Are Lovely. You'll see the stamp set where I got the You Are from later on in this video. But I like to use parts of sentiments, like that was a sentiment that said you are something else, and I just cut off the other word and used lovely die cut along with it. That's a great way to stretch your supplies by creating new sentiments, teaming them up together creatively. And here is the Hello card. You can see how the Hello die cut is a perfect match for the dark stamping on the flowers because we just wiped the ink right across the top of our stacked die cuts. Okay, so I still have a bunch of those flower bouquets left over. Some of them I'll save for later on, but I wanted to use one more, sharing another trick that I have for kind of stretching the pieces that I've made into multiple cards. Now for this, I have stamped You've Got This on a white circle die cut, and I'm gluing it onto a peach die cut that is slightly bigger. So I just used a circle die set for that. The You've Got This is from the floral stamp set I showed you earlier. Now I'm using the larger circle die to cut right from the center of my floral die cut. That seems weird, but that die cut's going to be covered there in the center. So I might as well cut the circle out and save that for another card. So I got this cute little circle floral piece, and then I can do that from these other flower bouquets too. And I can end up with multiple circles that look similar, and I can line them up to create a fun border on a card. Now I ran out of time to use these circles in today's video, but I'll have them ready to make a quick card later. Okay, now we have the other piece. All I have to do is glue them onto my card with the circle right in the center, and no one will ever know we cut that area away from the flower for another card. Now, oftentimes I need something for background, but I don't want to take a lot of time to make it. I need to save time, and my favorite way to create a background, saving time, is to make an impression with a die. So I'm using a new diagonal die from Pinkfresh Studio. I'll show more about it later. And I have a piece of peach cardstock that I'm going to make an impression on. I have my Spellbinders die cut machine, and in it I have my embossing mat. I'm going to lay the cardstock onto the embossing mat, then the die, and then my embossing plate, and I'll run that through. By having the embossing mat in there, it will make an impression of the die instead of cutting it. And all die cut machines have a process to do this. You just need to follow the instructions on the die cut machine itself. And I was giddy. I loved how that diagonal die made this background so quickly. I think it's so cool. So you'll be seeing me do that a lot more in the future. So using a background die to make an impression is time saving, because if you were to die cut, you'd have to assemble all the pieces and glue it on the card. And it's also a great way to stretch your supplies to get more from what you have. Okay, so I think I've done enough cards in this video using those images. Let's move on to some others. Now for this one, I'm going to show you a great hack that allows you to create 2 unique cards at once. I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Believe in Yourself stamp set. This is a new one, and it allows you to create a large image very quickly. It also has some great sentiments up there on the top. To create a bunch of these images, I'm going to follow the same process that I did before. I have some white cardstock, I have the coordinating die, but there's some room to squeeze in some other dies, so I might as well do that and save those for later. Once again, I'll use the negative space in my stamping tool to allow me to quickly stamp on each of these. I did some of the flower outline in the Rocky Slope ink, which is a nice gray ink. You can stamp it once for a lighter color or stamp it twice for a little bit of a darker color. And then I also did a bunch in black ink too. I like to have both options. That's another thing. You can change up each time you stamp. I then went and added the color to these. These are fun because they have an artistic look and you don't need to line it up just right. Okay, so I did all of the stamping on these off screen, and now let's do a fun background technique. This is the Color Block Diagonal Stripes die that I used earlier for the impression, but this time we're going to cut. I also have 2 pieces of cardstock that match my stamping. So you can see the cardstock is bigger than my background die. So I'm going to kind of line it up over on the edge. This is another thing that I do often off screen, and then I'll run that through my die cut machine and watch. Notice that because of how I positioned it, there is extra around the edge that are nice size strips that could be good for a border or for sentiment strips. So I'm going to cut those, and I keep them in a little mug in my craft room. And whenever I need a sentiment strip or border, I look there first. So I didn't want that to go to waste. Here's another trick that I do. I like to tear my tape in half so I have more to use. I'm putting this along all of my die cuts and lifting them all out at once. You can also do this with masking paper if you wanted to, so that it covers more area. But by doing this, I can pull out all those pieces and keep them in nice order. And I'll be able to reuse this purple tape to help me hold die cuts in place later on. Next, I have a piece of thin paper. This is just typing paper that's recycled. And I've covered an area with adhesive. Usually I use glue stick for this because a little goes a long way, but I couldn't find my glue stick, so I used tape runner. Now I am placing the stripes that we've created alternating right onto the adhesive. This doesn't take long to do because I have my die cut pieces all held together by tape, so I'm not fishing for the ones that I want. So I'm going to create 2 backgrounds this way. So I have enough pieces to create 2. You can see I'm cutting my typing paper in half and then doing the same on another. I'm actually going to only use 1 background today, but I have one saved for another day. Now it's time for our trick. I'm using the coordinating die to cut from one of our backgrounds. The die will cut through the cardstock and the scrap paper underneath. And now we have 2 pieces that we can use on 2 cards. On one of my cards, I'll take the negative space that you see me doing here, and I'm going to glue it onto a white note card. This will allow me to add a flower to the center, and no one will ever know we cut away the background for another card. So I'm going to glue this in the center, and I will say at this point I was a little ticked because I made it upside down. I wanted it to be this way, so now I have to fix it, and I wanted to show you how I fix it because I talk about how I do this all the time. I just cut the backing off, retrim it down. I keep the backing for something else, and then I find a new note card and glue it on. I tell you, I make upside down cards at least twice a week. Before we do the sentiment on this, let's go ahead and get our other card started. I'm using that striped piece that we die cut out, and I'm going to stamp on that. I thought it'd be fun to have white heat embossed image on this. So I'm using my anti-static powder tool, stamping the image with Versamark ink, and then I will add white embossing powder and heat set it. So I was able to create 2 cards from one, and no one will ever know I cut out that striped piece from the other card. Okay, now for the sentiment strip on here, I wanted to show you another trick that I do. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Simply Sentiments Hello stamp set. This is a big set, 6x8. So many different sentiments you can get from this, and it goes with the die set that I showed you earlier also. Now from this, I took the Better Days Are Sure to Come. I thought that was good for right now, and I wanted to white heat emboss it on black cardstock multiple times. So what I'm going to do is I'm putting purple tape on here just so you can see it better. I'm going to center that sentiment between 3 grid rows on my background, so between the purple tape. Then I'm going to put in some black cardstock, use my anti-static powder tool. I will stamp this with Versamark ink and then shift my paper up 3 grid rows, stamp it again, shift it up 3 more grid rows, and stamp it again, and do this over and over. The reason I chose 3 grid lines is because that's about the right width for this particular sentiment. You could either do more or less rows. So I added my white embossing powder, heat set it, and check it out. On the Tim Holtz trimmer, each of the grid marks in the background is the same width as the grid marks on the Misty stamping tool. So I just put my cardstock in, cut it, then move it 3 grid rows over, cut it, 3 grid rows over, cut it, and I end up with strips that are perfectly centered with the sentiment. I'll use 2 of these for the 2 cards that I just made, but I can save the others in a little bowl, so next time I need a sentiment very quickly, I can just grab one and it'll be ready. Okay, so here is my first completed card. I added the sentiment right to the center. I also stamped on my envelope once again. So we have a really bold, bright card here. This one is a little bit intense for me, but I like how I was able to save that piece behind the flower and use it for my other card. And I like that the second card, even though it's just using a scrap, has a very unique, different look to it. By the way, remember, I still have another stripe background. Now, I didn't have time to use it in this video, but I wanted to show you what I plan to do. These die cuts are from the Pinkfresh Floral Circle die set. It's a new one. There are actually 6 dies in the set. The last one cuts a flower, but I can't find the die cut on my desk. So here are just the 5. I thought it'd be fun to line these up on the stripe background to make a quick card and add a simple sentiment. So that's what I plan to do with that background later, but I did just want to remind you that this technique resulted in this extra card also. Okay, let's move on to another idea. This is one that I do a lot, and I wanted to show it to you in today's video. So let's start by doing the stamping. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Whole Lot of Awesome stamp set, and I am crazy about this. So it has all these pieces that you can stamp in different ways to create a multicolored one-layer card very quickly. And I plan to make a bunch of these for nurses and grocery store workers and stuff during this difficult time. What an awesome set. So it also has little birds in it, by the way. I didn't use the birds today because I'm going to show you how I stretched it to get a different look. But remember, it does have that option too. So here is my first trick. I need to stamp a bunch of panels with that Whole Lot of Awesome sentiment in black ink. Since I'm doing my stamping, I might as well stamp some other sentiments at the same time. So in the bottom of the MISTI, I'm doing the stamping that I need for this card. At the top, I have 3 sentiments, you can't see one of them, that I'm just stamping onto white cardstock. 2 of them are getting stamped right on the edge, so I can cut them off to be a sentiment strip. And then the You've Got This, I'm going to die cut a circle from, which if you remember, I used it earlier in this video. I film out of order. So I'm just stamping extra sentiments at the exact same time. Since I have my MISTI here, I'm going to be opening and closing and inking it with black ink. I might as well do additional stamping. I do that a lot, and it allows me to have extra pieces ready to go. Okay, so I stamped a bunch of backgrounds and added sentiments, and now it's time to add the little detail images from the A Whole Lot of Awesome stamp set. I tried to follow the guide on the background, but instead of doing birds, I changed it up a bit. I thought it'd be fun to have little flower images. So these little flower clusters are actually from the floral stamps that I used earlier. I actually cut the stamp to remove these. I can always use them how they were originally intended. But I'm stamping flowers onto this card instead. So I encourage you to look at stamp sets you have and how you can combine them creatively to get a different look and change things up. When I do things like this, it allows me to want to use my stamps more instead of getting bored with what I have. So I encourage you to try that. After doing all of my stamping, I used a rectangle die to cut the pieces down a bit. Now let's do the background. For this, I'm using the Pinkfresh Studio Ornate Floral die. I thought this was a beautiful die. You could do fun little piecing of different colors in it, but I'm just using it for a white on white background. I am saving all the little flower pieces because I do plan to make another card with them in the future, and I can just color them with ink to create something colorful. But today I've just die cut it from white cardstock, and I'm going to glue it onto a white cardstock background. So I'm using Gina K Connect liquid adhesive, and I'll glue it right on top. Very simple. Now I plan to put my stamped Whole Lot of Awesome sentiment on this, but it's going to cover up a lot of the background. So instead of letting that be hidden and go to waste, I'm going to cut away an area from the background. This is the trick that I do a lot off screen. So I have one smaller rectangle die, and I'm positioning it where my sentiment will go, where that stamped piece will go. I'm now going to run this through my die cut machine, and it'll cut through both layers of the background die cut and the background cardstock. So I run that through, and now I have 2 pieces from my background, the U-shaped piece and the square or the rectangle piece, which we'll use later on. This is kind of like the diagonal background I did earlier, where I didn't want the area that was covered by my piece that I added on top to go to waste. Okay, here's another trick before we assemble. I have my stamped piece and I wanted to mat it with this peach cardstock. So I put a little bit of adhesive on the back, just a bit, and I put it right up against the corner of this cardstock piece. And then I will use my trimmer to cut around it. Now, the reason I did temporary is I'm going to end up taking these pieces apart and die cutting from the peach. No one's going to see that big piece of peach cardstock behind the stamping, so I might as well die cut something from it. This lovely die cut is actually the die cut that I used earlier in this video. So another advantage of doing this is if you wanted to use the lovely die cut on this card, your die cut would perfectly match your mat. So it's a great way to just stretch your supplies, especially with the colored cardstock that sometimes I don't have a lot of, or I just want to kind of conserve it as much as possible. So the U-shape background piece I have glued onto a white top folding note card. That's what you see in the background there. And now I can glue this panel right on top of it, and no one will ever know that I had cut away a portion behind it. So here are two of the cards. I'm going to make more of these later. You can see the peach mat. No one will know that lovely was die cut from it. And you can see the tone-on-tone background from the background die, and no one will ever know I cut part of that away too. I did add white dots with a gel pen to the center of the little flowers, and also added some white iridescent jewels here and there. Now if you look closely, these two cards are a little bit different. I did different colors of ink. I did blue and yellow on the two cards. I like to do lots of stamping at once because it's also a way you can experiment with different color combinations. And oftentimes I'll write down combos I like, and the way I learn is by making more cards. Okay, this is our last card, and this one has a lot of ideas in it. Now, see that centerpiece that's green and blue and purple? That is the leftover piece that we cut away from our last card. So I have my Waffle Flower Mini Water Media Mat, which is my favorite surface to ink blend on because it kind of holds your paper still. And I'm using a blending brush and Pinkfresh Studio inks just to apply some green, blue, and purple ink. You can go very light as I started here, but then I decided to go on with a heavier hand. Remember, we have that layered die cut back there, which catches the ink differently and allows the pattern to stand out. This is a fun way to use that piece that otherwise would have been hidden by the stamped panel. For this card, I also used the new Pinkfresh Studio Color Block Stripes die. This background die is cool because the negative space can be used on a card, and then all the pieces that come out can be used for sentiment strips. I encourage you to look at your background dies. Oftentimes when you cut them, there are leftover pieces that are fun shapes, such as hearts or little butterflies or stars, or in this case, sentiment strips. In previous videos, I've shown many different methods for stamping sentiments onto strips that have already been cut, but this is the method that I reach for the most. I have a rectangle piece of cardstock in my MISTI, just a piece of scrap there, and I put a sentiment strip right up against it. I then line my sentiment on it, sorry my head gets in the way, close the door on my MISTI, and then I can stamp onto strips, each time just lining it up against the edge of the rectangle scrap. The reason I put that rectangle scrap there is it's hard to line up a sentiment on a strip right up against the ledge or edge of your MISTI. So I find that this is quick and easy. You can also use the creative corners that are available for your stamping tool, but this is what I seem to go for the most. So now I can go and quickly stamp the sentiment on a bunch of the strips so they're ready to go. Okay, now that I have my sentiment ready, I want to put dimension behind it. I don't like to cut foam tape to fit behind sentiment strips, so instead I use layers of cardstock to add dimension. So I took some of those other strips that we had cut from our background die, and I'm gluing them to the back of my sentiment. And I'll glue 2 or 3 pieces on the back. This will allow my stamped sentiment to stand out better, but I don't need to use a wobbly piece of foam tape. This will be nice and strong and will hold up nicely through the mail. And it's a great way to use up those thin scraps that we have, just to add dimension to your sentiment strips. So I'll glue that there, and I also have the Hello die cut from the die set that I showed you at the beginning of this video, and I'll glue that right above it. I did ink the top layer of the Hello die cut with the same purple ink that I used on the background so that it would match nicely. Okay, now it's time to assemble this card. I wanted to put a white mat around our inked panel and then dimension behind it. And I like to use scraps for this. I have a bunch of these white cardstock pieces where I die cut love from the center. I actually intentionally die cut love from the center so I could use the leftovers for this trick. So I have my panel, I'm putting adhesive on the back, and I'm going to center it over the love so you don't see the die cut behind it. I then am going to trim around this piece so that there's a little bit of a white mat around my inked panel. I could have used a rectangle die for this, but this was just a method I wanted to show since not everybody has rectangle die sets. Now it's time to build up more dimension behind it. So I have another love die cut. I'll put glue on the back of my panel, add it on top of the love, making sure I cover up that opening. And then I just use my scissors to cut right along the white mat that we already have. And I'll do this with 1 or 2 more layers so that I end up using up those love negative space pieces instead of letting them go to waste. And it allows me to add some dimension behind this inked panel. No one will ever know what it looks like behind it. Okay, once that was done, I have my background. It's a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white top folding note card. And then I have this cover die cut that we had left over from all of our strips. And I decided to glue it at an angle for something fun and different. Once it was dry, I trimmed off anything that was hanging off the edge of the card and then added our panel to the center. I also added some clear iridescent gemstones and then a bit of shimmer to the Hello die cut so it would stand out even more. So I use lots of tricks and leftover pieces on this card, but nobody would ever know. Okay, there you have it, a bunch of tips and tricks for saving time, energy, and supplies on your cards. Now, I know I threw a lot at you, but I'm hoping that something was helpful. Now, if you are interested in the products that I used today, they are linked in my description below, but remember, you can do a lot of these tricks with things that you already have. In the middle are a couple other videos that might be helpful. I really appreciate you spending this time with me today, and I hope everyone is staying healthy. We'll see you again very soon.